The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Abigail Turner against the wooden seat so hard her teeth rattled. And when she finally managed to push herself upright and peer through the dust-caked window, her heart sank into her swollen feet because this sun-bleached collection of weathered buildings was definitely not San Francisco. "Eldorado Canyon, madam," the driver called down, already tossing her trunk to the ground with a heavy thud that made her wince. End of the line. Abigail gathered her black mourning dress around her considerable frame and attempted to descend from the coach with whatever dignity she could muster. The Nevada heat hit her like a physical wall, and sweat immediately began trickling down her back beneath the layers of fabric that propriety demanded a widow wear. Her late husband, Charles, had been dead for 6 months, and she was supposed to be arriving at her sister's boarding house in California, not standing in the middle of this God-forsaken desert town watching the stagecoach disappear in a cloud of red dust. She stood there holding her worn carpet bag, squinting against the brutal afternoon sun, trying to make sense of the crumpled ticket she pulled from her reticule. The ink had smudged, but she could still make out what should have been her destination. Somehow, somewhere between St. Louis and here, things had gone terribly wrong. "Madam, you cannot be standing in the middle of the road like that." A weathered man with a graying beard gestured at her from the covered walkway. "Freight wagon comes through here every day about this time, and the driver does not slow for much." Abigail hurried to the side, her generous body protesting every quick movement. She had always been a large woman, but the past year of grief and her husband's long illness had added more pounds to her frame. Food had been her only comfort during those dark months of watching Charles waste away from consumption. "I need to get to San Francisco," she said, her voice cracking from thirst and exhaustion. "There has been some terrible mistake." The bearded man shook his head slowly. "Next stage west does not come through for another week, maybe more. Driver had to take a different route on account of flooding. You got money for a hotel?" Abigail's hands trembled as she opened her small purse. $3 and some change. Everything else she owned was in the trunk at her feet, and that amounted to precious little. Charles had left her with nothing but debts and a pile of medical bills. Her sister's letter offering her a position at the boarding house had been her salvation, her only chance at a fresh start. "I see," the man said, reading the answer on her face. "Well, the boarding house here might give you credit, but Mrs. Henderson is not known for her charitable nature." Abigail felt tears prickling at her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had done enough crying to last a lifetime. She was 32 years old, alone in the world, and stranded in a town she had never heard of with almost no money and no prospects. The situation was dire, but she had survived worse. She had nursed her husband through 2 years of slow death, had sold everything she owned to pay for his medicines, had endured the pitying looks of neighbors who whispered about her size and her childless marriage. She would survive this too. "Is there any work in this town?" she asked, straightening her spine. "I can cook, clean, so I can do accounts and write a fine hand." "Might try the ranches," the man offered, scratching his beard. "Harvest time is coming and some of the bigger spreads might need extra help in the kitchen." The Callahan Ranch is the closest, about 5 miles north. Thomas Callahan runs it himself since his father passed a few years back. 5 miles, in this heat, with her trunk. Abigail looked down at her black dress, already wilting in the oppressive temperature, and made a decision. "Could you direct me to where I might rent a horse or a wagon?" The man actually laughed, not unkindly, but it still stung. "Madam, with $3, you cannot rent much of anything. But old Pete Morrison might take you out there for $1, if you catch him before he gets too deep in his cups at the saloon." 45 minutes later, Abigail was wedged into a rickety wagon next to a man who smelled strongly of whiskey and tobacco, bouncing along a dirt road that seemed to stretch into infinity. Pete Morrison was at least sober enough to handle the reins, and he kept up a steady stream of chatter that required little response from her. "Thomas Callahan is a good man," Pete was saying, guiding the horses around a particularly deep rut. "Works hard, treats his men fair. Been running that ranch alone since his pa died in 1878. That was 3 years ago now. Folks thought he might marry the banker's daughter, pretty little thing name of Sarah, but nothing ever came of it. He is wedded to that ranch, people say. Lives out there mostly alone except for his ranch hands, and they bunk in the separate building." Abigail only half listened, watching the landscape roll by. She had never seen anything like this harsh Nevada desert, so different from the green Missouri hills where she had grown up. Everything here seemed designed to hurt you. The plants had thorns, the sun burned relentlessly, and the dust got into everything. She wondered what she was doing, heading to some stranger's ranch on the advice of a man she had known for all of 5 minutes. But what choice did she have? Sit in Eldorado Canyon for a week with no money and nowhere to stay. At least this way she was doing something, taking action, trying to shape her own fate instead of waiting for it to crush her. The ranch appeared like a mirage in the distance, starting with fence lines that marked off pastures where cattle grazed. Then buildings materialized: a large barn, a bunkhouse, several smaller structures, and finally a ranch house that was larger than Abigail had expected. It was a solid 2-story building with a covered porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. Someone had planted trees near the house, cottonwoods that provided precious shade. "Here we are," Pete announced, pulling the wagon to a stop near the house. "You want me to wait?" "No, thank you." Abigail climbed down carefully, trying not to think about what would happen if this Thomas Callahan turned her away. "I appreciate your help." She had just retrieved her trunk from the wagon bed when the front door of the house opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and a lean, muscular build that spoke of hard physical work. He wore simple clothes, canvas pants, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and scuffed boots. Abigail guessed he was in his late 20s, though the sun had weathered his face in a way that made exact age hard to determine. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep, cautious, but not unfriendly. Abigail took a breath and stepped forward, very aware of how she must look: a fat woman in widow's weeds, dusty and sweating, appearing unannounced at his door. "Mr. Callahan, my name is Abigail Turner. I am terribly sorry to arrive like this, but I find myself in unfortunate circumstances. I was meant to be on my way to San Francisco, but the stage dropped me in Eldorado Canyon by mistake, and the next one does not leave for a week. I have very little money and I am looking for work. I was told you might need help." She delivered the speech she had been rehearsing in her head, trying to sound competent and not desperate, though she felt very much the latter. Thomas Callahan came down the porch steps, his eyes taking in everything: her morning clothes, her size, the quality trunk that spoke of better circumstances in the past, the way she held herself despite obvious exhaustion. "You are a widow?" "Yes, sir. 6 months now. My husband died of consumption. I am sorry for your loss." He seemed to mean it, which was more than many people had managed. "What kind of work are you looking for? I can cook for your men, clean, mend clothes, tend a garden, keep accounts." "I ran my husband's household and helped with his business affairs. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Callahan, and I will not cause any trouble. I just need enough to pay for my stage fare and perhaps a little extra to tide me over when I reach California." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying her with eyes that were a startling light brown, almost amber in the harsh sunlight. Abigail forced herself to meet his gaze, to not look away or show shame about her appearance. She knew what she was, a fat widow with nowhere else to go, but she refused to apologize for existing. "My housekeeper quit 2 weeks ago," Thomas said finally. "Said she was tired of living so far from town, wanted to be closer to her grandchildren. I have been making do with my own cooking, which my men will tell you is barely edible. The house is a mess because I have been too busy with the ranch to keep up with it. I cannot pay much, but I can offer room and board and enough to get you to California, if you are willing to work." Relief flooded through Abigail so intensely she felt dizzy. "Yes, yes, I am absolutely willing to work. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. You will not regret this. We will see about that," but there was a hint of warmth in his voice. "Come on, I will show you where you will be staying." Fair warning, the previous housekeeper left the place in a state. He picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing and headed toward the house. Abigail followed, trying to take in everything at once. The porch was swept clean, but the windows needed washing. Through the open door, she could see a large main room with furniture that looked comfortable but dusty. Thomas led her through the house, pointing out rooms as they went. "Main living area, my office there, dining room, kitchen in the back. Upstairs are the bedrooms. You will have the room at the end of the hall. It has its own small sitting area and looks out over the garden, or what used to be a garden before it got away from me." The house was larger than anywhere Abigail had ever lived. Her home with Charles had been a modest 3-room apartment in St. Louis. This ranch house spoke of real wealth, or at least comfortable prosperity. The furniture was well made, the floors were solid wood, and the walls were decorated with simple but tasteful paintings of Western landscapes. Her room was more than she could have hoped for: a real bedroom with a brass bed frame, a wardrobe, a chest of drawers, and a small sitting area with 2 chairs and a side table. The window did indeed look out over what must have once been a tidy garden but was now mostly weeds and dried plants. "Bathroom is down the hall," Thomas said, setting her trunk down at the foot of the bed. "We have running water, which is a luxury out here. My father had a well drilled and installed pipes before he died. Take some time to settle in, clean up. Supper is at 6. I will introduce you to the men then." He was halfway to the door when Abigail found her voice. "Mr. Callahan, why did you say yes? You do not know me. I could be anyone." Thomas turned back, and for the first time she saw something like a smile cross his face. "You could be. But you looked like someone who needed help, and I happen to need help too. Seemed like fate was trying to tell us both something. Besides, you have honest eyes, Mrs. Turner. I learned to read people pretty well over the years." After he left, Abigail sat down on the edge of the bed and finally let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. This morning she had been on a stagecoach, miserable and scared, but at least heading toward her sister. Now she was at her ranch in Nevada, about to become a housekeeper for a cowboy she had just met. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was also, she realized, the first time in months that she had felt something other than grief and despair. There was fear, yes, but also a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. She unpacked her few belongings, washed her face and hands in the basin that had been left on the chest of drawers, and changed into a slightly less dusty black dress. Then she explored the rest of the house, taking mental inventory of what needed to be done. It was a lot. Every surface was dusty, the floors needed sweeping and mopping, the windows were grimy, the kitchen was in disarray with dishes piled in the sink and food spills on the counter. But it was not hopeless. It was just neglected, which was something she could fix. Abigail found an apron in the kitchen and tied it around her ample waist. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By 6 o'clock she had managed to clean the kitchen, wash the accumulated dishes, sweep the main rooms, and start on supper. The pantry was surprisingly well stocked with basics: flour, beans, rice, canned goods, root vegetables in a cool cellar she found beneath the kitchen. There was fresh meat in the icebox, which meant someone had been keeping that stocked at least. She put together a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, biscuits, and canned peaches. She was just pulling the biscuits from the oven when she heard boots on the porch and male voices. Thomas came in first, followed by 4 men who all stopped short when they saw her. "Boys, this is Mrs. Abigail Turner. She will be our new housekeeper. Mrs. Turner, this is Jack, Pete, Samuel, and Hank." "Madam," they chorused, pulling off their hats. They were all young men, probably ranging from early 20s to mid-30s, weather-beaten and dusty from a day's work. They looked at her with open curiosity but also with obvious relief at the smell of food cooking. "Supper is ready," Abigail said, finding her voice. "Please, sit down." She served the meal and watched as the men dug in with the enthusiasm of people who had been eating bad food for too long. Thomas ate more slowly, but she saw him take a second biscuit and then a third, and she felt a flush of satisfaction. "This is really good, madam," Jack said around a mouthful of stew. "Best thing I have eaten in weeks." "Months," Pete corrected, earning a look from Thomas. "It was not that bad," Thomas protested mildly. "Boss, you burned beans. I did not even know that was possible." Samuel shook his head in mock sadness. "You boiled beef until it was tougher than boot leather. Last week you made coffee so strong it could strip paint. Even Thomas had to laugh at that." "Fair enough. I am glad to have Mrs. Turner here to save you all from my cooking." After the men finished eating and headed back to the bunkhouse, Thomas helped Abigail clear the table. She protested that it was not necessary, but he ignored her and carried dishes to the kitchen. "You did not have to do all this cleaning today," he said, looking around at the spotless kitchen. "I expected you to rest after your journey." "I needed to do something useful," Abigail replied honestly, "and the work helped me stop thinking about everything else." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know that feeling. After my father died, I worked from dawn until I could barely stand, just so I would be too tired to think about him being gone. My men threatened to tie me down to make me rest." It was the most personal thing he had said to her, and Abigail felt something shift between them, not quite friendship yet, but a recognition of shared experience. "How long were you married?" Thomas asked, then quickly added, "If you do not mind me asking." "Tell me to mind my own business if you want. I do not mind. Charles and I were married for 8 years. We met in St. Louis. He was a clerk at a shipping company and I was working as a seamstress. He was kind to me when kindness was rare." She paused, surprised at her own honesty. "He was a good man, just not a strong one. The consumption took him slowly. That is hard, watching someone fade like that." "Yes." She did not elaborate, did not mention the medical bills or the way Charles had apologized with almost his last breath for leaving her with nothing. Some things were too raw to share, even in this moment of unexpected openness. "Well," Thomas said, straightening up, "I should let you rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day. The men breakfast at 5:30, dinner is at noon, and supper at 6 like tonight. They are not picky eaters, just hungry. I will show you the rest of the house in the morning, and we can discuss what else needs doing." After he left, Abigail finished cleaning up, then climbed the stairs to her room. She could hear the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the barn, the creak of wood cooling in the evening air. She sat at the window and looked out at the darkening sky. The stars were just beginning to appear, more stars than she had ever seen in the city. The night air was cooler now, a relief after the brutal heat of the day. Tomorrow she would wake up and cook for the men. She would clean this house and earn her wages and eventually save enough to continue on to California. This was temporary, she reminded herself. She was not staying here. This was just a stopping point on her way to somewhere else. But as she lay down in the comfortable bed, in the quiet room that was all her own, Abigail had to admit that this temporary situation felt more like home than anywhere had in a very long time. The days fell into a rhythm that surprised Abigail with its comfort. She rose before dawn to start breakfast for the men, learning their preferences and peculiarities. Jack liked his coffee with extra sugar. Pete could not abide onions. Samuel needed more food than seemed possible for someone his size, and Hank always thanked her twice for every meal. Thomas ate whatever she put in front of him without complaint, but she noticed he had a particular fondness for anything with cinnamon. So she started making cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings, and the way his face lit up when he came in and smelled them baking made her feel ridiculously pleased. During the day while the men worked, Abigail tackled the house room by room. She washed curtains and beat rugs, scrubbed floors until they shone, polished furniture and cleaned windows. She organized the chaotic pantry and took stock of what was running low. She mended work shirts and sewed patches on worn pants. The work was hard and her body ached at the end of each day, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from accomplishment rather than despair. She was doing something useful, something that mattered. The men appreciated her efforts, and Thomas praised her work in his quiet, understated way. A week passed, then two. Abigail had saved almost enough for her stage fare plus a little extra. The stage would come through Eldorado Canyon any day now. She should have been eager to leave, to finally reach San Francisco and her sister's boarding house. Instead, she found herself dragging her feet, finding reasons to delay. The garden needed more work. The men's clothes needed proper mending. Thomas had mentioned wanting to reorganize his father's papers in the office, and she could help with that. The truth she was avoiding was simple and terrifying. She did not want to leave. She had fallen into something here at the ranch, something she had never quite found anywhere else. Not just a routine, but a sense of belonging. The men treated her with respect and genuine warmth. They joked with her at meals and asked her opinion on things and actually listened to her answers. No one made comments about her size or her childless marriage or whispered behind their hands about her. And then there was Thomas. She had not meant to notice things about him, but it was impossible not to. The way he always washed up carefully before meals, even when he was exhausted. How he spoke gently to his horses, and never raised his voice to his men even when they made mistakes. The small kindnesses he extended without drawing attention to them, making sure she had enough firewood, fixing the loose board on her floor, bringing her fresh vegetables from a neighboring ranch. He worked harder than any man she had ever known, up before dawn and often working past sunset. But he also knew how to laugh, usually at himself. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her smile at unexpected moments. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Not pity, not judgment, something else entirely. Something that made her pulse quicken and her hands nervous. This was foolish, she told herself sternly. She was a fat widow with nothing to offer. He was a young rancher who could have his pick of women. That banker's daughter Pete had mentioned, the pretty little thing that was the kind of woman a man like Thomas Callahan should be interested in. Not someone like Abigail, who was old and heavy and used up. It was on a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks after her arrival that everything changed. Abigail was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard a woman's voice from the front of the house. "Thomas, Thomas, are you here?" Abigail wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the main room, uncertain if she should make herself known. Through the doorway, she could see a young woman in a fashionable riding outfit, blonde and petite and impossibly pretty. This had to be the famous Sarah. Thomas came in from his office, surprise clear on his face. "Sarah, I was not expecting you. I know I should have sent word, but Papa and I were riding out to the Morrison place and I thought I would stop by." Sarah's voice was bright and cheerful, but Abigail could hear the calculation underneath it. "It has been so long since we have seen you in town. I have been busy with the ranch. You are always busy with the ranch." Sarah moved closer to him, one hand touching his arm. "You need to make time for other things, Thomas, for socializing, for other considerations." Abigail knew she should announce herself or retreat back to the kitchen, but she stood frozen, watching. "I am content with my life as it is," Thomas said, gently removing her hand from his arm. "Are you?" Sarah's tone turned slightly petulant. "Out here alone, doing everything yourself? That is no kind of life for a man like you. You should have a proper wife, Thomas, someone who could help you take your place in society. Papa says the ranch is doing very well, that you have almost doubled your herd since your father passed. With the right wife, you could be one of the most important men in the territory." "I do not care about being important." "Well, you should." Sarah's voice was sharp now. "A man in your position has responsibilities. To the community, to the future. You cannot just hide out here forever." "I am not hiding." There was steel in Thomas's voice now. "I am building something, and I do not need—" That was when Sarah noticed Abigail standing in the doorway. Her expression went from irritation to shock to disdain in the space of a heartbeat. "Who is that?" "That is Mrs. Turner, my housekeeper." Thomas's voice was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Turner, this is Miss Sarah Henderson." "How do you do?" Abigail said quietly, feeling every pound of her weight under Sarah's critical stare. "A housekeeper." Sarah's laugh was like breaking glass. "Well, I suppose every ranch needs one. Though I must say, Thomas, people will talk. A man alone with a woman in his house, even one so obviously unsuitable for anything improper." The words hit Abigail like a physical blow. She had thought herself past being hurt by such comments, had developed a thick skin over years of cruel remarks. But something about the casual cruelty in Sarah's voice, the way she dismissed Abigail as too fat to even be considered a woman, cut deep. "That is enough." Thomas's voice was ice. "You will not speak about Mrs. Turner that way in my house or anywhere else." Sarah blinked, clearly not expecting to be reprimanded. "I was just stating facts. Surely you cannot be offended by— I think you should leave now, Sarah." Thomas moved toward the door, making his intention clear. "Thank you for stopping by, but as you noted, I have work to do." "Thomas, I did not mean—" "Yes, you did. Good day, Miss Henderson." He practically ushered her out the door, and Abigail retreated to the kitchen before she could witness any more. Her hands were shaking as she returned to preparing vegetables, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She heard the front door close, heard Thomas's footsteps, but she did not look up when he entered the kitchen. "Mrs. Turner." "Abigail." The sound of her first name in his voice made her freeze. "I am sorry you had to hear that. Sarah had no right to speak to you that way." She was just being honest. Abigail forced her voice to stay steady. "I am not offended by truth. It was not truth, it was cruelty." Thomas moved around the counter until she had to look at him. His amber eyes were angry, but not at her. "You are not unsuitable. You are hardworking and kind, and you have made this house into a home. In 3 weeks, you have done more good here than Sarah Henderson could do in a lifetime. You do not need to be kind to me, Mr. Callahan. I am not being kind, I am being honest." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "The truth is, I have been dreading the day you leave. I know you are saving money to go to California and you have every right to do that. But I want you to know you do not have to. You have a place here for as long as you want it." Abigail stared at him, unable to speak. Was he really saying what she thought he was saying? "I know I am not saying this right," Thomas continued, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What I mean is, you belong here, Abigail. Not as someone temporarily passing through, but as someone who is part of this place. Part of what I am building here, if you want to be, that is. I am not trying to pressure you or, 'I want to stay,'" Abigail heard herself say. "I want to stay so much it frightens me." The smile that broke across Thomas's face was like sunrise. "Yeah, yes, if you truly mean it, if this is not just pity, it is not pity." He took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it. "Can I be honest with you about something?" Abigail nodded, not trusting her voice. "That first day, when you showed up here dusty and desperate and trying so hard to be brave, something in me recognized something in you. I have been alone here for 3 years, building this ranch, working until I was too tired to feel anything. I told myself I was content. But then you arrived and suddenly everything was different. The house was warm. The meals were good. There was laughter at the dinner table. And I realized I had not been content at all. I had just been surviving." He took a breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "You make me want to live again, not just survive. And I do not care what you look like or what your past was or how old you are or any of that. I care that you are smart and funny and strong. I care that you treat my men with respect. I care that you make those cinnamon rolls even though they are extra work, because you noticed I like them. I care about you, Abigail, more than I probably should, given that we have only known each other a few weeks." Abigail's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I am not what men want, Thomas. I am fat and plain and—" "Stop." He did close the distance between them then, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. "You are what I want. If you will have me, that is. I know I am just a cowboy and this ranch is in the middle of nowhere, and I cannot offer you anything fancy. But I can offer you a home and a partner and someone who thinks you are the best thing that has happened to him in years." "I am a widow," Abigail whispered. "I was married to someone else. And I am a rancher who has never been married at all. We are both adults with pasts. That does not mean we cannot have a future. People will talk. Let them talk. I stopped caring what Eldorado Canyon thinks years ago." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip strong but gentle. "Stay, Abigail, not as my housekeeper. Stay as my wife." The world seemed to tilt. "Your wife? I know this is fast. I know you probably think I have lost my mind. Maybe I have. But I learned from watching my father that life is too short to waste time being careful. He loved my mother completely, and when she died, he spent years being lonely rather than risk feeling that much again. I do not want to make that mistake. I want to risk it. With you." Abigail looked at their joined hands, at this man who was offering her everything she had thought she could never have. "What if I cannot give you children? Charles and I tried for years. The doctor said it was probably my fault." "Then we will not have children. Or maybe we will adopt. There are always children who need homes. I am not marrying you for babies, Abigail. I am marrying you because you make me laugh and you care about people and you are not afraid of hard work. Because when you smile, really smile, it lights up the whole room. Because I look forward to every meal just so I can sit across from you and talk. You really mean this." It was not quite a question. Every word. "But if you need time to think about it, I understand. This is a lot to take in all at once." Abigail thought about her sister's boarding house in San Francisco, about the life she had been planning working for room and board, eventually maybe finding another position somewhere else. Always alone, always making do. Then she thought about this ranch, this house, this man who looked at her like she was something precious. "I do not need time," she said. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Thomas's smile could have powered the sun. He squeezed her hand, then seemed to realize something. "I should probably kiss you now, right? That is what people do when they get engaged." Abigail laughed, actually laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. "I believe that is traditional, yes. I have to be honest, I have not done much of this. Kissing, I mean. There was a girl when I was 17, but that was more than 10 years ago, and I do not think I was very good at it. Well, I have only kissed one man in my life, and that was always very proper and chaste, so I suppose we will figure it out together." Thomas leaned in, slowly, carefully, and pressed his lips to hers. It was soft and sweet and a little awkward, but it was also perfect. When he pulled back, they were both grinning like fools. "That was good," Thomas said. "I think we should practice that more. I think you might be right." They stood there in the kitchen, holding hands and smiling at each other, until the smell of burning vegetables reminded them that supper was still cooking. The news of their engagement spread through the ranch faster than Abigail would have thought possible. By the time the men came in for supper that evening, Jack was already congratulating Thomas and the others were giving her shy, pleased looks. "About time, boss," Pete said, slapping Thomas on the back. "We were wondering when you would work up the nerve. You all knew." Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "Boss, the way you look at her when she brings out biscuits." Samuel shook his head. "We would have had to be blind not to notice." Abigail felt heat rising in her cheeks, but it was from pleasure rather than embarrassment. These men were happy for them. There was no judgment, no mockery, just genuine warmth. They decided to have a simple ceremony in Eldorado Canyon the following Saturday. Abigail wrote to her sister explaining the change in plans, trying to put into words how completely her life had transformed in just a few weeks. Thomas sent one of his men to town to arrange things with the local minister. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Abigail cleaned and cooked as usual, but now there was a lightness to her movements, a song in her heart that had been silent for so long. Thomas spent his days working the ranch but found excuses to come to the house more often, needing a glass of water, checking on something in his office, asking her opinion on which horses to sell. Really, they both knew, he just wanted to be near her. They talked constantly, learning each other. Thomas told her about growing up on the ranch, about his mother who had died when he was 12, about his father teaching him everything about running cattle. Abigail told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had both died of fever when she was 16, about meeting Charles and thinking she had found security if not passion. "Did you love him?" Thomas asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I cared for him deeply," Abigail answered honestly. "He was good to me when I needed someone to be good to me, but I think we were more companions than passionate lovers. Does that sound terrible? No, it sounds human." Thomas took her hand. "I am glad he was kind to you. But I am also glad you are here with me now." "So am I." On their wedding day, Abigail wore the best dress she owned, a dark blue that was not quite mourning but not quite festive either. She had no family to stand with her, but the ranch hands cleaned up and came along, serving as witnesses and support. The minister at the small church in Eldorado Canyon was an elderly man named Reverend Phillips who had known Thomas since he was a boy. He looked at Abigail with kind eyes and asked no questions about the quickness of the engagement or the unlikelihood of the match. "Do you, Thomas James Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Thomas's voice was strong and sure, no hesitation. "And do you, Abigail Rose Turner, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Her voice shook slightly, not from doubt but from the overwhelming reality of it all. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride." This kiss was different from the one in the kitchen. This one was in front of witnesses, making their union official, and Thomas pulled her close without shame or hesitation. Abigail heard Pete whistle and someone else laugh, but she did not care. She was married again, but this time it was to a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. They had a simple celebration dinner at the hotel restaurant in town, all of them squeezed around a table probably meant for half as many people. The men toasted their health and happiness with enthusiasm if not elegance. Jack got a little drunk and made a speech about how Thomas had been unbearable to live with before Abigail arrived, and how grateful they all were that he was human again. As the sun started to set, Thomas and Abigail rode back to the ranch in the wagon. The men had tactfully decided to spend the night in town, giving them privacy. "Are you nervous?" Thomas asked as they pulled up to the house. "Yes," Abigail admitted. "Are you terrified?" But he was smiling as he helped her down from the wagon. But the good kind of terrified, the kind that comes with something worth being scared about. He carried her over the threshold, which made them both laugh because she was not a small woman, and it required considerably more effort than the romantic gesture usually implied. But Thomas managed it without complaint, setting her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan." "It feels strange to be called that." "Good strange." They stood awkwardly for a moment, two people who had talked easily all week suddenly unsure of themselves. Finally, Thomas said, "Would you like some coffee? Or we could just go to bed, to sleep, I mean, unless you want to do more than sleep." "But there is no pressure. We have the rest of our lives." Abigail reached up and cupped his face, feeling the roughness of his evening stubble, the warmth of his skin. "I want this marriage to be a real one, Thomas, in every way. I want to be your wife completely. Are you sure?" Instead of answering, she kissed him. This kiss was deeper than the others, more urgent, and Thomas responded with gratifying enthusiasm. They made their way upstairs, stopping to kiss every few steps, laughing and breathless. Thomas had moved his belongings into her room, their room now earlier in the week. The bed that had seemed so large to Abigail alone now seemed intimate and perfect. What happened next was tender and fumbling, and absolutely perfect. Thomas was patient and careful, constantly checking that she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. Abigail had worried about him seeing her body, about her weight and her stretch marks, and all the ways she fell short of conventional beauty. But Thomas looked at her with such open desire and affection that her self-consciousness melted away. "You are beautiful," he whispered against her skin. "I mean that. Every inch of you is beautiful to me." And the miraculous thing was, with him, she felt beautiful. She felt desired and cherished and perfect exactly as she was. Afterward, they lay tangled together, both of them grinning in the darkness. "That was," Thomas paused, searching for words, "considerably better than I imagined. And I imagined it quite a lot this past week." Abigail laughed and swatted his chest playfully. "You are incorrigible. I am married to the most wonderful woman in Nevada. I am allowed to be incorrigible." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Abigail woke several times in the night just to verify this was not a dream. Each time Thomas was there, solid and real and hers. The next months passed in a haze of happiness that Abigail would not have believed possible. She had thought herself content during those first weeks at the ranch, but that contentment was nothing compared to the joy of being Thomas's wife. She fell into the rhythm of married life with an ease that surprised them both. Mornings began with quiet moments together before the day's work started. She learned that Thomas liked to watch the sunrise with his coffee, that he was grumpy if he did not get enough sleep, that he sang off-key when he thought no one was listening. Thomas learned that Abigail woke up slowly and needed time to gather her thoughts, that she had a wicked sense of humor that came out when she was relaxed, that she loved to read and would stay up too late with a good book. They learned each other's bodies, too, exploring and discovering what brought pleasure. Their physical relationship continued to be tender and passionate, and Abigail marveled at how comfortable she felt with Thomas. He made her feel desirable in a way she never had before, not even in the early days with Charles. The ranch work continued as it always had, but now Abigail felt even more invested in it. This was her home now, her future. She took pride in how smoothly the household ran, in the meals she provided for the men, in the small improvements she made to the house and grounds. She managed to revive part of the garden, planting vegetables and herbs that would be useful in the kitchen. Thomas helped her build raised beds, working alongside her in the evening after his ranch duties were done. They would work in companionable silence or talk about their days, or sometimes just enjoy being near each other. The men clearly approved of the marriage. The atmosphere at meals was relaxed and friendly, with easy joking and laughter. They treated Abigail with respect and affection, and she grew fond of each of them in return. Jack was the youngest at 23, ambitious and always trying to prove himself. Pete was in his 30s, steady and reliable, with a dry wit that often caught her off guard. Samuel was probably close to 40, built like a bear and strong as one, but gentle and soft-spoken. Hank was somewhere in between, quiet most of the time but with surprising depths when he did choose to speak. They became like family to her, these men who worked hard and asked for little. She mended their clothes and listened to their occasional troubles, and made sure they always had good food and clean quarters. Winter came to Nevada, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. The work of the ranch shifted with the seasons, and Abigail learned what that meant, checking on cattle in harsh weather, making sure water sources did not freeze, preparing for the long months ahead. Thomas taught her to ride, starting with the gentlest horse on the ranch. It took patience and practice, and Abigail had many frustrating moments when she felt too large and clumsy to ever get it right. But Thomas never lost patience with her, never made her feel inadequate. "You are doing great," he would encourage her. "It just takes time. I promise you will get it." And eventually, she did. The day she rode out with Thomas to check on the herd, she felt a fierce pride in her accomplishment. Riding across the open land with the wind in her face and Thomas beside her, Abigail felt more alive than she ever had. Christmas came and went, a small celebration with just their little ranch family. Abigail cooked a feast, and Thomas surprised her with a beautiful blue dress he had secretly ordered from a catalog. She gave him a warm coat she had sewn herself, lined with wool and fitted to his exact measurements. They exchanged gifts and shared the meal, and then Thomas produced a fiddle that had belonged to his father. Abigail had not known he could play. He was rusty, he admitted, but he managed some simple songs and the men sang along, their voices loud and joyful and completely off-key. It was the best Christmas Abigail had ever had. Winter turned to spring, and with spring came a new round of work. Calving season kept everyone busy, with long nights checking on pregnant cows and helping difficult births. Abigail found herself drafted into service more than once, following Thomas out into the cold night to hold a lantern or fetch supplies. She learned to assist with births, holding steady even when it was messy and difficult. Thomas praised her calm competence, and she felt a deep satisfaction in being useful in this way, in being a true partner in the ranch work and not just someone who stayed in the house. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management. The herd grew, the cattle were healthy, and he was able to hire 2 additional men for the busy season. With more mouths to feed, Abigail's workload increased, but she did not mind. She enjoyed the challenge of cooking for a larger group, of managing the household efficiently. One afternoon in late spring, Thomas came in early from his work, which was unusual. Abigail was in the kitchen working on bread dough when he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I have been thinking," he said, kissing her neck in a way that made her shiver pleasantly. "Oh, about what?" "About expanding the house. Adding on a couple more bedrooms, maybe a bigger kitchen since you are feeding so many people now. That sounds practical." Abigail turned in his arms to face him. "But I sense there is more you are not saying." Thomas grinned, that boyish expression that made her heart flutter. "I have been thinking about those extra bedrooms, what we might use them for eventually, if we are lucky." It took Abigail a moment to understand his meaning, and when she did, her breath caught. "Thomas, I told you I probably cannot have children. The doctors said it was probably you, which means they did not actually know. And even if they were right, things can change. I have heard stories of women who could not conceive for years and then suddenly did." He cupped her face gently. "I am not saying this to pressure you or make you feel bad. I just want you to know that if it happens, I will be thrilled. And if it does not happen, I am still thrilled because I have you. Either way, having extra bedrooms seems like a good idea." "You really would not mind? If we never had children—" "Abigail, I spent 3 years on this ranch completely alone except for my men. Then you showed up and changed everything. You are enough. You are more than enough. A baby would be wonderful, but you are not required to produce children to make me happy." She kissed him then, deeply and thoroughly, and the bread dough was forgotten for quite a while. Summer arrived with blistering heat and long days of hard work. Abigail had been feeling strange for a few weeks, tired in a way that was different from normal exhaustion, nauseous at odd times, emotional in ways she could not quite explain. She dismissed it as the heat and the increased workload. Then one morning she woke up and ran for the basin, barely making it before she was violently sick. Thomas woke instantly, holding her hair back and rubbing her back. "Are you all right? Was it something you ate?" "I do not think so." Abigail sat back, wiping her mouth with a shaking hand. "I have been feeling off for a few weeks now. I thought it was just the heat, but—" They stared at each other as realization dawned simultaneously. "Could you be?" Thomas whispered. "I do not know. Maybe. My monthly courses have been irregular since Charles died, so I did not think anything of missing them. But if this is morning sickness, we need to get you to a doctor. The nearest doctor is in Virginia City. That is a full day's ride. I do not care if he is in San Francisco. We are going." Thomas was already getting dressed, moving with purpose. "I will have Pete saddle the wagon. We are leaving within the hour." Abigail wanted to protest that he was overreacting, but secretly she was glad. If she really was pregnant, she wanted to know for certain. And if she was not, she wanted to know what was wrong with her. The journey to Virginia City was long and uncomfortable, even in the wagon. Thomas drove carefully, trying to avoid the worst of the ruts, constantly asking if she was all right. Abigail bore it with as much grace as she could manage, though by the time they arrived she was exhausted and more than a little irritable. The doctor in Virginia City was a middle-aged man named Dr. Harrison who had kind eyes and gentle hands. He examined Abigail thoroughly while Thomas paced in the waiting room outside. Finally, Dr. Harrison smiled at her. "Well, Mrs. Callahan, I have good news. You are definitely pregnant, about 3 months along, I would estimate." Abigail felt the world tilt. "Are you certain?" "Quite certain." "You are healthy and the baby seems to be developing normally. You will need to take care of yourself, eat well, get plenty of rest. Given your age and your weight, this will be considered a higher-risk pregnancy, so I want you to be cautious. But I see no reason why you cannot carry this baby to term and deliver safely." When Thomas was called back in and given the news, his face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, joy, terror, and finally settling on a grin so wide it looked like it might split his face in half. "We are having a baby," he said wonderingly. "Abigail, we are having a baby." On the long ride back to the ranch, they talked about everything and nothing. Names they liked, what they would need to prepare, how they would tell the men. Thomas was already planning where the nursery would go, talking about building a cradle, wondering if it would be a boy or a girl. "Thomas," Abigail finally said, laughing, "slow down, we have months yet. I know, I just cannot believe it." He reached over and took her hand. "I cannot believe how lucky I am. A year ago I was alone here, just working and existing. Now I have you and we are going to have a baby. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, I do not want to wake up," they told the men at supper that night. The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic backslapping for Thomas, gentle congratulations for Abigail, and Jack declaring they should celebrate with whiskey, before Pete reminded him that the mother-to-be probably should not be around drunk cowboys. In the months that followed, Abigail's body changed in ways both wonderful and challenging. Her belly grew, making her already substantial frame even larger. Some days she felt beautiful and powerful, carrying life inside her. Other days, she felt enormous and awkward and worried that something would go wrong. Thomas was unfailingly supportive. He took over more of the heavy household work without being asked, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and rubbed her aching feet at night. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and how much they were already loved. The men pitched in as well, helping with tasks that were becoming difficult for her. Samuel built her a special chair with extra cushioning for her back. Jack started chopping all the vegetables for meals so she would not have to stand as long. Pete and Hank took over the laundry completely. As her due date approached, Thomas became increasingly nervous. He insisted on having Dr. Harrison come stay at the ranch for the last 2 weeks, paying him handsomely for the inconvenience. The doctor agreed, seeming amused by Thomas's intense concern. "Your husband loves you very much," Dr. Harrison told Abigail one afternoon as he checked on her. "I have never seen a man so devoted." "I know," Abigail replied softly. "I am very lucky. The baby is in a good position. Everything looks as it should. It could be any day now." It was 3 days later that Abigail woke in the middle of the night with the first contractions. She tried to let Thomas sleep, but he woke anyway when she got up to pace. "Is it time?" He was instantly alert. "I think so. The pains are not too bad yet, but they are regular." Thomas went to wake Dr. Harrison while Abigail tried to stay calm. She had heard so many horror stories about childbirth, especially for older women having their first child. She was terrified something would go wrong, that she would lose the baby after coming so far, or worse, that she would die and leave Thomas alone again. The labor was long and difficult. Abigail had never experienced pain like this, waves of agony that seemed to go on forever. Dr. Harrison stayed calm and professional, coaching her through it, but she could see the concern in his eyes as the hours stretched on. Thomas stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. She screamed at him more than once to get out, that this was all his fault, but he just smiled and told her she was doing wonderfully. Finally, after more than 20 hours of labor, Abigail heard the most beautiful sound she had ever heard her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," Dr. Harrison announced, placing the squalling infant on Abigail's chest. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Abigail looked down at her son, this tiny perfect person who had somehow come from her body, and started to cry. Thomas leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face as well, his hand gently touching the baby's head. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "Abigail, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James Thomas Callahan, after both his father and grandfather. Jamie, they called him, and he became the center of their universe. Abigail had worried she would not know how to be a mother, having never had one for most of her life. But the moment she held Jamie, instinct took over. She nursed him and rocked him and marveled at his tiny fingers and toes. Thomas was equally besotted, spending every moment he could spare from ranch work holding his son, talking to him, showing him around. The men were surprisingly good with the baby. Samuel carved him toys. Jack made faces that got him to laugh. Pete sang lullabies in a surprisingly sweet voice. And Hank kept a careful watch anytime Jamie was outside, as if guarding him from unseen dangers. Jamie grew quickly, a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed fascinated by everything around him. He had Thomas's amber eyes and Abigail's dark hair, and he smiled easily at everyone he met. When Jamie was 6 months old, Thomas finished the addition to the house, the expanded kitchen and the extra bedrooms. They moved Jamie into his own room, though Abigail found herself checking on him constantly in the night. "He is fine," Thomas would murmur, pulling her back to bed. "You need sleep too." Life on the ranch continued its rhythms, now punctuated by the needs of a small child. Abigail learned to balance motherhood with running the household, though she had to admit it was more challenging than she had anticipated. Thomas hired a girl from town to come help a few days a week, giving Abigail time to rest and focus on Jamie. The seasons turned again, bringing Jamie's first birthday. They celebrated with cake and presents, and all the ranch hands gathered around to watch him smash his first slice of cake into his face with delighted enthusiasm. "Can you believe it has been almost 2 years since you arrived here?" Thomas asked that night as they lay in bed, Jamie finally asleep in his room. "Sometimes it feels like forever," Abigail replied. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. I remember standing in Eldorado Canyon with $3 to my name, thinking my life was over. And now I have everything I never knew I wanted. A husband who loves me, a beautiful son, a home, a purpose. I am happier than I ever imagined I could be." Thomas pulled her closer. "Good, because I am not letting you go anywhere. You are stuck with me. I can think of worse fates." They lay quietly for a moment, then Thomas said, "I have been thinking about something." "Another baby," Abigail guessed. They had talked about it, about whether they wanted to try again. Eventually, maybe. But I was thinking about something else. There is a family in town, the Martins. Good people, but they are struggling. Too many mouths to feed. They have a daughter, Emily, who is 12. Smart as anything, but no chance to go to school because she is needed at home. I was thinking we could offer to take her in, give her room and board in exchange for helping you around the house and with Jamie. She could learn from you, maybe eventually go to school if she wanted." Abigail turned to look at him in the darkness. "You want to bring a child into our home to help her? Is that bad? I know it means more work for you in some ways, teaching her and such. But I thought it might be good for everyone. For her, for us, maybe even for Jamie to have someone else around. Thomas Callahan, you are a good man." "Yes." Let us talk to the Martins. If Emily wants to come, we would be happy to have her." Emily Martin arrived 2 weeks later, a thin girl with wary eyes and calloused hands. She was clearly overwhelmed by the ranch, by the space and the relative luxury compared to what she was used to. But Abigail saw intelligence in those eyes and a desperate hunger to prove herself useful. "You are not a servant here," Abigail told her gently. "You are part of our household. You will help with chores, yes, but you will also eat with us, and you will have time for yourself. Mr. Callahan wants to arrange for a tutor to come once a week so you can continue your education. Is that something you would like?" Emily's eyes went wide. "A tutor for me, if you want it." "Yes, madam, more than anything." Emily proved to be a blessing. She was hardworking and eager to learn, and she was wonderful with Jamie. The boy adored her, following her around whenever she would let him. She helped Abigail enormously with the household work, and the tutor Thomas, hired a retired schoolteacher from Virginia City, declared her to be one of the brightest students she had ever taught. At night, after Jamie and Emily were both in bed, Thomas and Abigail would sit on the porch and talk about their day, their plans, their dreams. These quiet moments together were precious, a chance to reconnect as a couple amidst the busy demands of their life. "You ever regret it?" Abigail asked one evening. "Taking a chance on a fat widow who showed up on your doorstep by mistake," Thomas laughed. "It was not a mistake, it was fate. And no, I have never regretted it for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Abigail Callahan. You and Jamie and this whole life we built together. Even when I am cranky because I did not sleep well, especially then." He kissed her temple. "I love all of you, even the cranky parts." When Jamie was 2, Abigail found herself pregnant again. This time the realization came faster, and she was both thrilled and terrified. The first pregnancy had been difficult. Would the second be even harder? But this pregnancy was actually easier. Perhaps because her body knew what to do now, or perhaps because she was less stressed, but she felt better throughout. She still grew large and uncomfortable in the last months, but she did not have the same level of exhaustion and sickness. Thomas was still intensely protective, but he had learned to relax a little. And Emily was a tremendous help, taking over many of Abigail's duties as she got bigger and less mobile. This labor was shorter too, only 8 hours instead of 20. Dr. Harrison had moved to Eldorado Canyon by this time, making it easier to get help when needed. And when Abigail finally pushed out their second child, she heard the doctor say, "It is a girl, a beautiful, healthy girl." They named her Rose, after Abigail's middle name and after the wild roses that grew near the house. She had dark hair like both her parents and eyes that started blue, but gradually changed to amber like her father's and brothers. Jamie was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Emily was equally smitten, spending hours rocking Rose and singing to her. The ranch house that had once seemed so empty and lonely was now full of life and love and noise. The addition Thomas had built was put to good use, with Emily in one room and the children sharing another until they got older. Years passed in a blur of activity and joy. Jamie grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved following his father around and learning about the ranch. Rose was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love for books and drawing. Emily continued to blossom under their care, eventually going to school in Virginia City and dreaming of becoming a teacher herself. The ranch prospered. Thomas expanded their herd and bought more land. He became known throughout the territory as a fair employer and a skilled rancher. People in Eldorado Canyon, who had whispered about his strange marriage to the fat widow, now spoke of the Callahans with respect and even admiration. Abigail never lost her weight, remaining a large woman throughout her life. But she also never again felt ashamed of her body. Thomas's continued desire and affection made her feel beautiful, and her children loved her exactly as she was. She wore brighter colors as the years passed, leaving behind the widow's black and embracing life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised her with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children in Emily's capable care and spent a week in the city, staying in a fine hotel and seeing all the sights. Abigail finally met her sister, who marveled at the transformation in her. "You look happy," her sister said. "Really, truly happy. I worried about you for so long, but I can see you have found where you belong." "I have," Abigail agreed. "I never expected it to be on a ranch in Nevada, but life has a funny way of working out." The night before they left to go home, Thomas and Abigail walked along the harbor, watching the ships come and go. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had made it here that first day?" Thomas asked. "If you had ended up at your sister's boarding house instead of at my ranch?" "Sometimes," Abigail admitted. "I think about that other life, the one I thought I was heading toward. It would have been fine, probably. Safe and practical. But it would not have been this. It would not have been you and Jamie and Rose and the ranch and everything we have built together." "No regrets then?" "Not a single one." She squeezed his hand. "The best mistake I ever made was ending up at your ranch, Thomas Callahan, and the best thing I ever said was stay anyway." They returned to the ranch to find their children had missed them terribly, and the men had somehow managed to cause minor chaos in the kitchen. Life quickly returned to normal, which was exactly what they both wanted. More years passed. Jamie grew tall and strong, clearly inheriting his father's build and his love for ranching. Rose remained quieter but no less capable, and she eventually announced she wanted to be a doctor, which shocked everyone until they remembered how calm she had always been in a crisis. Emily graduated from her teaching course and got a position at the school in Eldorado Canyon. She married a young lawyer named Daniel and started her own family, though she always stayed close to the Callahans and considered them her true family. Thomas's hair started to gray at the temples, and Abigail found laugh lines forming around her eyes. They were getting older, but neither minded. They had built a good life together, raised good children, created something meaningful. On a spring evening when Jamie was 18 and Rose was 16, the whole family gathered on the porch after supper. It had become a tradition, these evening gatherings where they talked about their days and their plans. "I have been thinking," Jamie said, "about the future of the ranch. Pa, I know you are not ready to retire or anything, but I want you to know that I am ready to take on more responsibility. I love this place as much as you do, and I want to help it continue to grow." Thomas looked at his son with obvious pride. "I was hoping you would say that. There is plenty of work for both of us, and I would be honored to have you as a full partner." "And I," Rose added, "have been accepted to medical school in San Francisco. I will need to leave in the fall." Abigail felt her heart squeeze. She had known this was coming, had encouraged it even, but the reality of her daughter leaving was hard. "We are so proud of you, Rose. You are going to be a wonderful doctor." "I will come home as often as I can," Rose promised, "and maybe eventually I can come back and practice medicine here. There is certainly a need for it." That night, after the children had gone to bed, Abigail and Thomas sat together on their porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill. "Our babies are growing up," Abigail said softly. "They turned out pretty well, I think. We did good. We did." Abigail leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember that first night after we got married? You were so nervous." Thomas laughed. "I was terrified, convinced I was going to mess everything up somehow. But you did not. You never did. You have been the most wonderful husband, Thomas." better than I ever dreamed possible. Right back at you. That day you showed up here, dusty and desperate and trying so hard to be brave, I knew my life was about to change. I just did not know how much or how good that change would be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful and prosperous. Inside the house, their children slept safe and loved. Beyond the house, the land stretched out that they had worked so hard to build into something meaningful. "Thank you," Abigail said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For looking at a fat widow who arrived by mistake and seeing someone worth keeping. For giving me a chance when I had nothing to offer but myself." Thomas turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands the way he had so many times over the years. "You offered everything, Abigail. Your strength, your kindness, your laughter, your love. You made this house a home. You gave me children and partnership and purpose beyond just working. You offered me everything, and I am the one who should be thanking you for accepting me." They kissed, a soft, gentle kiss that held years of love and commitment and shared life. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Thomas said, standing and offering his hand. "Let us go to bed. We have a big day tomorrow." "We have a big day every day," Abigail pointed out, but she took his hand and let him pull her up. They walked into their house together, turning out lights as they went, checking on the children one more time before heading to their own room. The same room where Abigail had slept that first night, uncertain and scared but also hopeful. The room where they had learned each other, loved each other, built their life together. As Abigail settled into bed beside her husband, feeling his arm come around her waist and pull her close, she thought about that terrified widow who had stepped off the stage in Eldorado Canyon all those years ago. She had thought her life was over, that she was heading toward a quiet existence of making do and getting by. Instead, she had found everything she never knew she wanted. Not because she went looking for it, but because a good man had looked at her and said, "Stay anyway." And she had stayed. Through seasons and years, through challenges and joys, through the raising of children and the building of a life. She had stayed, and in staying she had found home. The ranch continued to thrive for generations. Jamie took over from Thomas when his father was ready to step back, running it with the same fairness and skill. Rose did return after completing her medical training, opening a practice in Eldorado Canyon and serving the community for decades. She never married, finding her fulfillment in her work and her family. Thomas and Abigail grew old together, watching their children have children of their own, seeing the ranch they had built together continue and expand. They faced the challenges that come with age, aches and pains and limitations, but they faced them together, as they had faced everything else. In their final years, they still sat on that porch every evening, holding hands and watching the sunset. They told their grandchildren stories about the old days, about how Grandma had arrived by mistake and Grandpa had asked her to stay. The children loved these stories, especially the dramatic parts that got bigger with each telling. When Thomas died at the age of 73, peacefully in his sleep with Abigail beside him, she grieved deeply but without regret. They had had 46 years together, years full of love and laughter and purpose. She had given him the best of herself, and he had given the same to her. Abigail lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp-minded and still in charge of the household, despite her age and size. She spent her final days in the room that had been hers from the beginning, looking out the window at the garden that had grown so lush over the years. On her last evening, Rose sat with her, holding her hand. "Tell me again," Rose said softly, "about how you met Pa." Abigail smiled, her old eyes warm with memory. I got off the stage in the wrong town with $3 to my name and nowhere to go. Someone told me about a ranch that might need help. I showed up uninvited at your father's door, dusty and desperate, and asked for work. I expected him to turn me away. Instead, he looked at me and said, "Stay anyway," and I did. I stayed, and it was the best decision I ever made. You loved him very much. I loved him more than words can say. And he loved me back, exactly as I was, without wanting me to be different or smaller or anything other than myself. That was the real gift he gave me, Rose. Not just a home or security or even children, though I treasure all of that. He gave me the gift of being fully myself and being loved anyway. Everyone deserves that. I hope you find it someday in whatever form it takes for you. I am happy, Mama. My work fulfills me. I have family who loves me. That is enough. Then I am glad. Abigail squeezed her daughter's hand. You and Jamie turned out so well. You made me proud every single day. That night, Abigail went to sleep and did not wake up. She died as she had lived those last decades peacefully, surrounded by love, content with the life she had built. They buried her next to Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together decades earlier. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Nevada ranchers and townsfolk, former employees and distant relatives, people whose lives had been touched by the Callahans' generosity and kindness. Jamie spoke at the funeral, his voice breaking with emotion. My mother arrived in Nevada by mistake, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the strength of her character. My father saw that strength and asked her to stay. Together they built something beautiful. They built this ranch, yes, but more than that, they built a family based on love and respect and acceptance. They showed us all that what matters is not where you come from or what you look like, but who you are and how you treat people. I am proud to be their son, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to their example. The ranch remained in the family for generations after, each new caretaker adding their own chapter to its story. But the foundation was always the same, the foundation built by a cowboy who took a chance on a widow who needed help, and a widow who was brave enough to stay. In the house that Thomas had expanded to fit their growing family, later generations found Abigail's journals, carefully maintained over decades. They read about that first desperate day in Eldorado Canyon, about the wagon ride to the ranch, about the moment Thomas said she could stay. They read about the wedding and the birth of the children and the 1,000 small moments that make up a life well lived. They read about love that grew and deepened over time, about partnership and respect and joy. And they understood that this ranch, this legacy they had inherited, was built on something more valuable than land or cattle or money. It was built on love, messy and imperfect, an absolutely real love between two people who should never have found each other, but somehow did. The story of how the Obese widow arrived at the ranch by mistake, and the cowboy said, "Stay anyway," became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But those who remembered Thomas and Abigail personally knew the real magic was not in the dramatic beginning, but in what came after the decades of showing up for each other, of building a life together through good times and bad, of choosing each other every single day. That was the real love story. Not love at first sight or instant passion, but the deep, enduring love that comes from truly seeing another person and choosing to stand beside them through everything life brings. It was a love built on respect and friendship as much as passion, on shared work and shared dreams, on making each other laugh and holding each other through grief. It was the kind of love that lasts not just a lifetime, but generations, rippling outward to touch countless lives. And it all started with a cowboy who looked at a desperate widow and saw possibility, and a widow who was brave enough to take a chance on a stranger's kindness. Their love story ended, as all love stories must, but their legacy lived on in the land they tended, in the children they raised, in the example they set, and in the simple truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings. And so the ranch continues even now, worked by the descendants of Thomas and Abigail Callahan, standing as a testament to what can be built when two people find each other against all odds and decide that love, real love, is worth staying for.